So, did you play any good games in 2024? There seems to be a prevailing sentiment out there that 2024 was a bit of a down year for video game releases. As for myself, I did probably play fewer games that actually released in this year than possibly any prior year, but that might say more about me than the state of video games, because, as always, we've already got backlogs deeper than we know what to do with. And a good game is always worth playing, whether it's 4 years old or 4 decades old. So, these are the games that we played in 2024.
"2024 is coming to an end just as if it felt like it was getting started. This has been an interesting year for me personally in terms of the types of games that I played, but also how life events, like trips and vacations, influenced me to play certain games when I did. That's not to say anything about how many good new games came out this year. It's been a while since I've had this many must-play new games on my personal list. But before we get to that, let's start with some unfinished business from 2023. I mentioned that I had started Alan Wake in December of 2023, but I didn't want to rush through it because a game with 13 years of anticipation behind it deserves more respect than that. Besides, doing it in 2024 meant that I could look at it as a complete experience since both pieces of DLC arrived this year. I'm a huge Remedy fan. From the time that I signed out Max Payne from my electronics boutique job and plowed through it in a weekend, this developer has occupied a very special place in my heart. They faltered a little bit with Quantum Break, but a particular story beat near the end brought me back in a big way. Control was my favorite game that I played a couple of years ago, in no small part because of the way that it established a broad connected universe between Remedy's games. There were always hints, but when Alan Wake, a character that I'd wrongly presumed we'd never hear from after the 2010 original, struggled to meet expectations, directly appeared in Control's second DLC, AWE, I absolutely lost it. I'm going to be as vague as possible here because I don't want to spoil it for those who have yet to play it, but yeah, Alan Wake delivers on studio head Sam Lake's promise to be one of the scariest games of all time. Well, at least it worked on me anyway. The way that it plays with light, darkness, and shadows is masterful, but the way that it incorporates mixed media, like gameplay with video aspects sprinkled in, is remarkable.
How does it taste, Jacob? I feel like $1 million.
One sequence in particular does this in a super impressive manner, although it doesn't quite top Control's ashtray maze. The first DLC, Night Springs, is made up of 3 vignettes. The first one is pretty throwaway, but the second and third expand the wider world of the Remedy universe. The second DLC, The Lake House, is the equivalent to the AWE episode in Control, this time bringing Federal Bureau of Control agent Kieran Estevez into the horrific world of Alan Wake 2. The monster design here is especially creepy, and it ends on a high note which has me heavily anticipating Control 2. After I let everyone know just how much I loved Returnal in 2023, I kept getting all sorts of suggestions for other roguelikes or roguelites that I should try. Hades from Supergiant Games came highly recommended.
Cries of battle.
I installed it on my PlayStation 5 one cold January morning to simply check it out, and let's just say that it took no time at all for it to sink its claws into me. The next few weeks had me fitting in a run whenever I had a little bit of extra time. The isometric angle and overall art style rides parallel to Supergiant's previous games, Bastion and Transistor, of which I've only played the former. But their take on Greek mythology, a setting that I'm pretty much over by now, managed to reel me in because it just felt different. The way these characters look, I mean, they're all beautiful, and the way that they talk in this bored, disaffected tone while interacting with each other was leagues more interesting than the grandiose posturing of, say, God of War. It's very rare that I'm so taken by voice acting and character designs in a way, but I relished every line of dialogue here, especially from Megara the Fury.
How very flattering to have compared me to the remains of some mindless, outsized lizard. Come, maybe I'll kill you just as easily as your new Hydra friend.
The actual gameplay isn't revolutionary by any means, it's just super solid and refined. Once you get the hang of the various weapons and power-ups, you'll slowly claw your way out of the underworld towards a confrontation with Hades on the surface. Like Returnal, the levels in Hades are only randomly generated insofar that they're only random in their placement. Each room is fully designed, but they're connected in a different order each time you play. This is a good compromise for me without being truly procedurally generated. Although I was initially disappointed that there seemed to be only 4 unique areas that you pass through, in practice, even one more area would have been too much. A typical run will take you about an hour, but by the time you beat Hades himself, you've definitely put in the time and earned it. And you know what? You're going to want to do it again just to see if you can do it better. I suppose that's what roguelikes are all about, right? But with Hades, you got to do it 10 times before you get the true ending. It's sort of a lot. The first time was a relief and subsequent attempts moved quicker, but when I hit 10, I was done and ready to move on. I'm far from the only one to get hooked on the poker-inspired roguelike Balatro in 2024. Its rise to fame happened slowly and steadily, and once it was nominated for Game of the Year on the Game Awards, well, those who played it knew how much it deserved to be there. Here's the thing. Balatro will sneak up on you. Everyone I've ever talked to about this game, and including myself, had little to no interest in trying it based on the very premise or the visual style alone. Once I tried it on my phone while I was killing time at the airport, it took about 2 or 3 games before things clicked into place, and yeah, its reputation is totally justified. Now, I play it almost every day when I'm eating my breakfast cereal. All I'm saying is, you gotta try it for yourself to really understand the appeal of what it has to offer. Heck, I've never been much of a card game aficionado. I never even knew what all the different hands in poker were, which is maybe a little bit sad, but Balatro has single-handedly taught me all the different hands and what they mean, and it's definitely made me a lot more interested in that stuff in general. Just give it a shot if you have the means to do so, because there is so much more to it than it looks like. On the opposite end of the spectrum, about as far away from Balatro as possible, we have RoboCop Rogue City. It's not a roguelike, but it's got rogue in the name. Developed by Teon, who had a good bit of success adapting the Terminator series a few years back with Terminator Resistance, in which they ignored everything that came after the second movie and delivered what was essentially the third movie that should have been. Rogue City celebrates the first 2 films while mapping out what a third movie should have been story-wise. There's none of that jetpack and robot ninja nonsense here, just good old-fashioned crotch blasting, wall smashing ultra-violence. Like with Terminator, Teon shows such reverence for the look and feel of the world of RoboCop, as if they studied every single frame of the movie to recreate it here. Just roaming around the police station, which is filled with familiar characters, or through the dilapidated warehouse that Murphy was gunned down in, should be a treat for fans. And getting Peter Weller back for the voice of RoboCop was the cherry on top.
Serve the public trust. Protect the innocent. Uphold the law.
Sure, RoboCop accurately moves about like a lumbering tank, but that never once bothered me. In fact, it was nice to play a slower-paced first-person shooter that truly allows you to inhabit the character you're controlling. There's a lot of optional content scattered among the open areas, but Rogue City doesn't overstay its welcome by running around 15 to 20 hours.
It's RoboCop!
Surrender your weapons.
No chance! Light 'em eye!
Make it all shine.
this is probably the best time to talk about Power Wash Simulator. I'm not sure what happened here, but for several weeks after picking up my kids from school, I'd come home and play this for a decent chunk of time. It was just a good way to check out. Every day, my wife would get home from work and couldn't believe that I was playing it again. Every single day. For certain people, the basic satisfaction of spraying away the dirt from different homes, vehicles, and objects is soothing and therapeutic. Removing the dirt in specific patterns, like making a big square and then slowly shrinking that square down, tickles a part of my brain in the same way that mowing the lawn does. In fact, I started likening the experience of playing Power Wash Simulator to mowing the lawn. Except, there's no tangible, real-world benefit to it. Dispersed between the proverbial water jet streams is a hilarious little story for those who need more narrative connective tissue in their games. But, you know what, chances are nobody's playing this for the story. It's not for everyone, and plenty won't get it and claim it's a total waste of time. And they're not wrong, but that's sort of the point. Sometimes that's exactly what a person needs. Relating this to mowing the lawn led me to seek out Lawn Mowing Simulator. All right, it was $20, so I grabbed it. Unfortunately, it doesn't land the way that I hoped it would and bogs down the whole thing with running a business details that get in the way of mowing the darn lawn. I was more disappointed in this than I probably should have been. So can the games that I played this year get dumber than mundane job simulators? Heck yeah, it can when Loco Cycle is in the conversation. And I don't mean this in a bad way, so allow me to very carefully describe this incredibly stupid game in a way that might make you want to try it. Yeah! Loco Cycle is about a futuristic motorcycle that was struck by lightning, causing it to become self-aware. The newly sentient motorcycle decides to hit the road and attend a biker rally in Scottsburg, Indiana. That premise alone is dumb enough. But now, imagine a mechanic named Pablo who is working on the bike trying to fix it. And he accidentally gets his pant leg stuck near the exhaust pipe and is dragged behind it for the entire cross-country journey.
What do you say, Pablo? Shall we live the extreme dream together? Come on, Pablo. Let us smoke them until the wheels fall off.
I mean, in a way, it's basically the plot of the movie Short Circuit with a lot more wanton violence. You see, this motorcycle, named Iris, uses guns, kung fu, and Pablo as a boomerang to take down an endless onslaught of enemies. Add in full-motion video cutscenes that pay tribute to the legendary B-movie film production company Troma Entertainment, complete with alumni like James Gunn and Lloyd Kaufman appearing. Oh, and even Tom Savini.
Tie her to the missile!
The evil lowrider pursuing Iris is voiced by Robert Patrick. You know, the actor who played the T-1000 in Terminator 2.
Freedom Rally. Yes. Yes. That is where she will be.
There's a lot happening here, and I was more than happy to let go and just enjoy the absurdity. I just about died when it turned into a rail shooter and all the backgrounds were city flyby stock footage. You know, it's just it's such an oddball that it became one of the most memorable games I played all year. Barreling towards the end of the year, Sony's PlayStation 5 platformer Astrobot is one of the most celebrated games of 2024. Upon its initial reveal, I was absolutely thrilled to see a full, non-VR traditional Astrobot game, because I was introduced to the character in Rescue Mission, but I just wanted to see how it played without being tethered to that. So I cleared my plate of obligations around its September launch, and platinumed the game over the course of 4 days. This is the kind of game that fans of the medium absolutely dream of. And these days, they don't come along very often. Part of why Astrobot was among my favorite games of the year is because of its simple approach. There's not a lot of controls here, so its pickup and playability made it extremely accessible. I've talked to several PS5 owning parent friends who have played through this with their kids, and it's been a magical time for every single one of them, making memories that you'll think about when they're teenagers and refuse to talk to you about anything except when they need money. Not talking from experience or anything. Anyway, it's truly made for everyone, Sony computer entertainment fan or not. Although you'll surely get more out of it the longer you've enjoyed PlayStation consoles, games, and peripherals. The number of deep-cut character references that pop up is staggering. Just kicking around the thousands of candy sprinkles and jewels that the game will drop on you at any given moment drives home just how pretty Astrobot is. It doesn't seem to be pushing any crazy graphical tech, but I'd argue that kicking around the insane amount of objects without slowing down is more impressive than the most realistic graphics are, at least to me. The soundtrack is also great, but it did recycle a lot of the themes from Rescue Mission and Playroom, which made it slightly less special to me. Except, when I truly marked out at the music choice on the final level. What a moment. So yeah, I platinumed the game in a few days, which took me around 17 hours in total. It might seem short to those who balk at that much content for a full $70, but the old adage, all killer, no filler, is appropriate because those 17 hours deliver at a level that your typical 80 to 100 hour open world grindfest could never even dream of.
For me, Astrobot was absolutely in the running for Game of the Year, but 2 points that aren't really its fault kept it just shy of getting my pick. For one, while it's chock full of fun and creative scenarios, I've been fully on board with the series since Astrobot Rescue Mission on PSVR 1, and I absolutely loved Astro's Playroom at the PS5 launch. Team Asobi had to fight so hard to legitimize Astrobot, to finally reach an audience that wasn't limited by VR adoption, or for their game to be dismissed as just some small throwaway pack-in. So for me, while the game is filled with creative scenarios, well-implemented power-ups, and bouncy music, I mean, the game is an artistic expression of pure joy, but I've been charmed and wowed by Astrobot before. So the impact for me was perhaps just a little less than it would have been had this been his first game. The other point that kept me from picking it as Game of the Year, it makes me so happy while playing it, but when I think about it while not playing it, I feel a bit melancholy. Because when you look at the breadth of PlayStation history celebrated by Astrobot, most of it looks nothing like the Sony Interactive Entertainment of the past decade. It feels like a goodbye to the Sony that was, the PlayStation brand that actually gave people reasons to get attached to it. An indictment from within of the current state of Sony and the bloat of AAA gaming. And you know, given the difficult year that the games industry had in 2024, I do hope that Astrobot's success will be a catalyst for change, leading to more games from big companies like Sony that aren't so self-serious. Smaller and more varied games that can take risks and can be made by fewer people for less money and take up less of our time so that we can go buy another game and move on to that. I mean, you'd like that, right, Sony? AAA gaming can turn this ship around.
And the Game of the Year is...
While I normally don't take much stock in the Game Awards,
Astrobot!
Seeing Astrobot win Game of the Year made me unexpectedly emotional and teary-eyed.
I remember I was a kid in 1989, Christmas, and I got a grey box. There was a game packed in, it was called Super Mario Brothers, and it was really, really great.
I was far happier to see Astrobot win than I would have been had my own Game of the Year pick won, because it gave me hope that maybe Astrobot isn't just the old Sony riding into the sunset, but rather the start of a renaissance. With its hilarious God of War special level, Astrobot put me in the mood to finally tackle God of War Ragnarok. As it happens, I also played the 2018 God of War Norse reboot a couple of years late. High expectations based on that game's universal praise left me feeling a bit let down. It was good, but not as incredible as expected. So with appropriately recalibrated expectations, I would say that I enjoyed Ragnarok quite a bit more. Now, I must apologize a bit for the quality of my footage because I wanted to play the game with its unlocked VRR performance setting where it runs at something like 80 to 90 frames per second most of the time. But since this video is of course 60 frames per second, that might cause some motion to look a bit juddery. A big thing for me here though was using a modified version of the classic control scheme, which puts light and heavy attacks on square and triangle, and partner attacks on R2. I mean, I'm all on board with shoulder buttons being used for melee combat in Souls-like games, but for some reason it grates on me that it's starting to become standard in just about every other action game too. I mean, I get the logic behind it, keep your right thumb on the camera, but I just never fully got used to the modern control scheme in the 2018 game, and it was too late to switch to classic by the time that I knew it was there. In Ragnarok, thanks to the gyro aiming options, I didn't really feel at a disadvantage for using face buttons for ranged attack, even with Atreus' bow gameplay. In this one, I did almost all of the major side content because it was mostly well designed with fun character moments and compelling exploration of large regions that you wouldn't see at all if you only stuck to the main plot. It's not going to be an all-time list-topping PlayStation classic for me or anything, but Ragnarok was certainly a good time, and I was compelled all the way through. Another game that was celebrated in a small way by Astrobot was Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. I tried this briefly back in the early 2000s, but for some reason didn't give it too much of a chance. Flash forward 2 decades, and stream guest Max Roberts, who had recently invited me onto his Max Frequency podcast, suggested that I stream the first Sly Cooper, and boy am I glad he did. While the game does have its jank, which I expect may be improved upon in the sequels, I was thoroughly impressed by how well it uses its heist theme, dividing the game up into themed episodic hubs where you gradually work your way into each villain's inner layer. The structure, mechanics, and generally well-implemented level gimmicks make for a 3D platformer that's just different enough to still feel fresh. I knew that Sucker Punch's infamous games shared some mechanical DNA with Sly Cooper, and while the sticky, low-risk climbing and jumping makes sense in an open-world superhero game, I expected it to make for a very boring platformer. But Sly 1 is surprisingly challenging as a platformer, and frustrating at times to be sure. But I'm okay with that because I expected something that I could just cruise straight through with disappointingly little friction. And now I can't wait to see what shenanigans await me in the rest of the series.
Nice shooting, Sly! Looks like we're in the clear!
Just like the year 2024, the titles of the next 3 games end in the number 4. While I liked Pikmin 3 a lot back in 2013, I just don't remember a lot of specifics about how the controls, map, and multitasking aspects were advanced from the GameCube games. So when it comes to Pikmin 4, I'm not 100% sure what's new or different in terms of minutia like that. Obviously, Ochi, the rescue pup, is new, and he rules. I especially like how he can jump, carry all Pikmin types across water, and fling the entire squad atop monsters with his charge attack. I also thoroughly enjoyed the dungeon crawling this time around, which is something that always brought Pikmin 2 way down for me. Maybe I'd enjoy Pikmin 2 more now than I did when it was new? I've tended to prefer the sense of tension that the limited life support resources brought in Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 3, but whether due to better design or due to me just looking for something different in the series than I used to, Pikmin 4 worked great for me, even though it aligns more closely with Pikmin 2. The best thing that I can say about it is that when the credits were rolling, I was thinking, I hope that's not it. And indeed, it was not. I actually wanted more, and yes, the game continues on with more levels and other things to do, which continue to hold my attention onto the true ending. Ridge Racer 7 was one of my favorite games I played in 2023, and a couple of commenters suggested that I get Namco's Negicon controller to make it a bit easier for me to get into the earlier Ridge Racer games on PS1 and PS2. I followed their advice, and I am so glad I did. I decided to just test out the Negicon one day with Ridge Racer Type 4, but instead of just going, yeah, that's neat, and putting it aside for another day, I got totally hooked and ended up clearing all 4 of the Grand Prix difficulty levels. The Negicon helped me feel so connected to the game that I would nearly forget it was 25 years old. It felt fresh, new, and exciting. I can also totally see why many people consider Type 4 to be the peak of the series. The presentation is so good that I just had to order the soundtrack as soon as I finished with it. The debut of the Fallout show on Amazon Prime was widely regarded as a pleasant surprise this year. I also thought it was pretty darn entertaining, and given how long I'd been putting off playing through Fallout 4, I figured I'll probably never be more in the mood for it than I was after finishing the first season of the show. However, this timing also coincided with the release of a current-gen patch for the game, which, well, typical Bethesda, it seems that also introduced a bug that totally broke the hit percentages for the VATS targeting system. I was too committed to the playthrough by the time I confirmed it was a bug and not the intended behavior though, so I was able to get by with mostly real-time combat, but this did reduce my enjoyment, and I'm unclear on whether it's been fixed. All in all, I did have a good enough time, but even if VATS were working, I'd much sooner replay New Vegas than spend more time on Fallout 4. If you recall, of the 10 games I pledged to beat in 2023, I finished only half of them, which means I had to carry over those remaining 5 games to 2024, in addition to 10 new pledges that I had to make at the end of the games we played in 2023. We'll see how that went throughout this video, but this time I picked several shorter games, with the first one I tackled being Heavenly Sword.
Clear out the bodies! Patience, my darling! It's not over till I say it is!
Andy Serkis was a really big deal in the early 2000s thanks to his portrayal of Gollum, so really, it made a lot of sense for Sony to bring his motion capture performance expertise to video games as the PS3 360 generation got underway, playing not only Heavenly Sword's lead villain, but also acting as dramatic director for the entire cast of this cinematic character action game. The result is just about the most ham and cheese you can find this side of the original PlayStation. And honestly, it does help the game stand out.
My men will cut him to shreds out there. Now I can shower my attentions on you.
Between the wacky performances and totally ridiculous aftertouch mechanic where you guide projectiles in slow motion via ill-advised 6-axis motion controls, I couldn't help stop thinking about how if Sam Raimi ever directed a video game, this is pretty much exactly what it would be like. Though it had its defenders, Heavenly Sword was judged harshly back in the day on its 5 to 6 hour runtime and exceedingly poor frame rate. I've generally liked the Ninja Theory games that I've played though, and I managed to get along with this one just fine. I even got kinda decent at guiding the Evil Dead projectiles, so I enjoyed myself in spite of the game's obvious problems. All in all, it's quite a fascinating time capsule, full of experiments for the new generation that reflect Sony's early struggles with the PS3. A game that buckles under the weight of its own ambitions just as much as the PlayStation brand itself at the same time.
Very entertaining! Let's heat things up a bit, shall we?
Back in 2020, we streamed Seth Fulkerson's excellent PC ports of the infamous CDI Zelda games, which authentically preserved the game's campy animations while making them marginally more enjoyable to play. Flash forward to 2024, and Seth released his first commercial video game, Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, an earnest and sincere spiritual successor to those CDI Zelda games, which aims to preserve the weirdness that made them internet icons while making the gameplay actually enjoyable. Now, we're a bit biased. Seth and producers Audie and John are our friends, and we even got to assist in the making of the game in some very small ways, from playtesting and feedback to animating the parody animations of the CDI and Link and Zelda title sequences. But perhaps most fun of all, I got to have a bit of a cameo as the blacksmith Yukine.
If you ever need something special done with that little sword of yours, just drop by and I'll give it a shellacking.
And Coury plays the role of Crody the Crow.
Princess, I can't thank you enough.
I should be thanking you.
Macaw!
There were absolutely takes that they couldn't use of Crody because I was trying so hard and failing at stifling my laughter behind the scenes.
Good. I must be off. There are more crows to liberate. Caw!
Of course, all that happened in 2023, and it made me so happy to see Arzette hit its target audience so well in 2024, and to have gotten such positive word of mouth. I had a great time playing through the finished game and enjoying the backgrounds, sprites, and wacky animations produced by Seth's talented art team. So, congrats, Seth. And if you ever need something special done with that next game of yours, just drop by and I'll give it a shellacking.
Having had a tiny little part in Arzette, the Jewel of Faramore, I knew that it was going to be great, but I don't think that I or anyone else truly thought it was going to be this good. I've taken a distinct pleasure in witnessing the reaction from just about anyone that's played it. I can't tell you how many times I saw comments on social media claiming, "What? This is actually good, and this is better than it has any right to be." Arzette's success has made me impossibly happy for Seth and his team. The journey from remaking the often derided Zelda CDI games to one of the most beloved original titles of 2024, well, Seth deserves all the success, and I'm honored to have been a part of it.
Allow me to teach you to move like a crow.
Okay, since we're here, let's take this opportunity to continue on with some more modern retro titles that I played this year. Botvice from DYA Games is a gallery shooter inspired by titles like Wild Guns, but the overhead perspective changes things up just enough to make it fresh. Hide behind destructible cover, dodge roll, and blast everything that moves. The result is a perfectly paced, intense arcade shooter that deserves more attention. It's usually on sale for around a few bucks, so it's well worth it for fans of this genre. There's also a demo on the Switch eShop if you're still hesitant. Hyper Gunsport from Necrosoft Games is a 2-on-2 horizontal air hockey / volleyball mashup, which at a glance seems pretty cool and has some killer character designs. One of which has a perfectly coiffed cigarette Swiss roll style pompadour. It's pretty incredible, but the gameplay just didn't gel with me. I'm not sure if it was being limited to a small number of shots before reloading, or just how precise each and every shot needs to be to make them count. but the on-ramp seemed pretty steep and I quickly got frustrated. I appreciate Necrosoft's games because they're quirky and the sprite work is always gorgeous. Hyper Gunsport was no different, but it just didn't grab me this time around. I'm still looking forward to their upcoming Demon School though. The announcement and subsequent release of Sunsoft's Euphoria The Saga 2 totally caught me by surprise. Sunsoft's track record hasn't been the best in the past couple of decades, but there's a renewed vigor within the 4-hour runtime of Euphoria 2 that really has me excited to see what they bring back next. The original Famicom Euphoria never made it to the US shores until the Wii Virtual Console. Using a new handmade aesthetic that's similar to something like Yoshi's Woolly World is the most modern thing about it. Everything else, from the progression of the story, the platforming, and the music, feel like they were made for the 8-bit generation. I can't think of another time when I played a game that so accurately dials in the feel of a game that you'd have played 30 years ago without looking like it. I revisited Bionic Commando Rearmed for the first time since it was originally released in 2008. Yep, it still hits as one of the best remakes of that, or frankly any generation. The music is simply on another level when compared to its contemporaries. The series will likely never return at this point, but what we have here is a crowning achievement anyway. It's just too bad that there's not an easy way to play this on modern hardware. I have to wonder why Rearm 2 was made to be backwards compatible on the Xbox One and Series consoles, and this one was left to die. While I made that tribute video for the Xbox 360 Marketplace ahead of its closure in July, one of the games that I had a chance to revisit was Fez, for the first time in about a decade. Whoa, this game is even better than I remember, and I clearly didn't appreciate just how good it was when it was new. Hey, did you know that Fez is out on the Switch? Playing it on the 360 for that video had me searching for a more convenient and portable way to play it. And what do you know? Gravity Circuit flew under my radar last year, but good word of mouth from some close friends made me understand just what I was missing out on. This is kind of like Mega Man X meets Streets of Rage with a little Bionic Commando thrown in for good measure. Yeah, it is awesome and the music is so good. It took me a while to get into a groove with it, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty exhilarating. I'm not embarrassed to admit that I had to knock it down to easy mode so that I could finish it. But I'm glad I did because some of those later levels are absolutely brutal with their checkpoints. If I had one complaint, outside of how many times I've accidentally called this Gravity Rush, it's that I wish the characters had more color to them. It's an aesthetic that I don't quite agree with, but I respect their decision nonetheless. Did anyone else play Devil Blade Reboot on the PC? If not, download this incredible vertical shooter immediately. So I guess this is a remake of a Japanese exclusive PC shooter from 1996 that I'd never even heard of, but I assume it's beloved among those who played it nearly 30 years ago. The main gimmick here is that you do more damage and get more points the closer you are to an enemy when shooting it. It seems like a simple mechanic, but it's very effective and satisfying. It's sorta short compared to your typical shooter of this ilk, but there's tons of stuff to unlock, including that original game.
O Divine One, bless our holy empire.
We were given an advanced Steam copy of Bubbo Burst from our longtime friend Gabe Swar at Goboko Games. This is the third game in the Bobo trilogy, which started back on the Playdate before moving to the Game Boy, and now this new one is on the PC. Burst is a simple, yet addicting puzzler that harkens back to something you'd find in the arcade in the early 80s. You gotta fill as many squares in the arena to maximize your score. It's simple, but there's some deep strategies at play that might just blow your mind.
Welcome to Victory Heat Rally.
Victory Heat Rally is an homage to both kart racers and Sega Superscalar arcade racers in the same vein of Power Drift, and this was an unexpected surprise. It was kickstarted a couple of years back, but I totally missed that business. When it dropped on Steam, I figured what the heck, and it looks pretty sweet, so I'll give it a try. And it is pretty awesome, if a little shallow in the gameplay department. The only real deep mechanic here is power sliding / drifting and boosting, but where it really shines is in the visuals. It's bright and saturated in color, faithfully recreating that trademark Sega blue sky vibe. But as good as I found Victory Heat Rally to be, its lunch was summarily stolen and eaten by Parking Garage Rally Circuit within minutes of booting it up.
Ready, set, go!
This is a Sega Saturn-inspired arcade racer where you drift around curiously designed parking garages. Sometimes you ramp off from one parking garage to another. It's nuts. Once again, drifting is the main mechanic here, but let me tell you, this is some of the tightest drifting implementation this side of Outrun 2. You know it's gotta be good when I compare it to what is probably my favorite racing game of all time. On top of that, it absolutely nails the Saturn aesthetic on all fronts. Chunky polygons, or are they quads? I mean, just look at this option menu. If you had a Saturn with a Pro Action Replay cart to play imports back in the day, you immediately recognize this, and your nostalgia bone is tingling. That sounded gross. Anyway, if you want to tweak these options to bring it closer to the visuals of a real Saturn, there's plenty here. Heck, force it to 30 FPS and lower the draw distance for all I care. This is all to say nothing about the ska-infused soundtrack that is certainly an inspired choice. But this is absolutely a tough game, asking you to really learn the tracks and find shortcuts, which can occasionally be annoying because the physics get wonky at times, and one screw-up means you have no chance of winning the track. But stick with it, it's great. I had a couple of weeks in the interim between finishing a longer game that I'll talk about later, and the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which I'll also talk about later. So instead of getting into something big and complex, I booted up Gone Home one rainy Saturday night when my wife and kids were out of town. I hadn't played Gone Home since its original release on the PC back in 2013. At the time, the plot of the game was a complete mystery to me, except I knew that it took place in an empty house on a rainy night in 1995. It looks like, very intentionally, that it's going to be a horror game. It's basically screaming at you that nothing is what it seems, and something very bad happened to your family. As the story unfolds through clues and audio recordings, it becomes something unexpected and beautiful. 11 years later, and knowing how things play out, it was still just as powerful. Actually, for me personally, it was even more powerful now because I'm a father with a daughter on the verge of entering her teenage years in just a few months.
The sunset light in this house is the saddest thing I've ever seen. I just want to sleep. When I'm in the attic, it almost feels like Lonnie could still be here.
In Rays of the Light is another first-person exploratory experience. The opening shows a family hastily fleeing a town before you're unceremoniously dumped in what looks like an abandoned college campus with little guidance of what to do. Exploration is very similar to Gone Home, and it has the same imposing sense of doom, but you'll get an idea of what happened here pretty quickly, and it's not something beautiful. To the Moon had been sitting in my Steam inventory for more than a decade. It'd been recommended to me years ago, and I bought it and just never played it. The best way to describe it is that it's an interactive narrative with 16-bit graphics and characters. It takes a little bit of time to understand and really get going, but the story about a technology that allows one to change a person's memories before they die, thus allowing them to believe they lived a full life or wish things had played out differently, presents an interesting moral conundrum. In the end, though, those memories are for that one person alone, so there's not really a lot of grappling going on about whether it's right or not. By the end, I certainly welled up because it really sticks the landing here. After wrapping it up, I found that there's another entry in the series called Finding Paradise. I'm definitely going to be playing that in 2025. About 8 months later, I returned to the interactive story genre in December with Mouthwashing. Word of mouth spread pretty fast on this one, but I was lucky enough to have nothing about it spoiled for me. I barely even knew what it looked like. When anything tells you right off the bat, I hope that this hurts, you probably know you're in for something. It's hard to convey how this game will make you feel. Compared to the other games I've talked about in this section, Mouthwashing is far more terrifying, uncomfortable, and grotesque. The entire helpless vibe reminded me of a Swedish film called Aniara, which also deals with the psychological horror of isolation in the vastness of space. It does hurt, and the stuff that you experience in this 3 or 4 hour story, with its lo-fi dithered visuals, will be burned into your brain for a while.
This year's Backloggery stream theme was the Year of the Ninja, a theme that our backlogs were all too ready to provide plenty of entertainment to match. And we kicked things off by delving into a series that, while not exclusively about ninjas, certainly has plenty of ninjas. And as someone who has never really clicked with fighting games, I was about to go well outside my comfort zone.
One dead Lin Kuei in a tick.
Round 1, fight!
Drumble and Lindis talked me into playing through the newer Mortal Kombat games since they're well loved for their story modes. This had me starting with the PS3 360 era game that's just called Mortal Kombat, more popularly referred to as Mortal Kombat 9. This serves as a great starting point due to time travel shenanigans, rebooting the entire timeline back to the period of the first game, ultimately kind of recapping the entire original trilogy with some twists. I have to say, it was indeed a good time with a great presentation for its era, and I even took to the mechanics better than any of us thought I might. Despite some struggles, I managed to get all the way through to the end, which makes me happy because I hear that Shao Kahn and some of the 2-on-1 fights in this game are by far more difficult than anything yet ahead of me in the series.
You have already lost.
Don't get me wrong. I still think that fighting games hiding gameplay depth behind memorizing input combos is kind of obnoxious. But the core movement mechanics in this game feel a lot better to me than I expected, based on limited experience with the SNES and N64 versions back in my teens. I can't imagine putting in the time to learn the game well enough to be competitive. I just want to have fun beating the computer and enjoying the campy story, but maybe I'm a Mortal Kombat fan now.
May the Elder Gods watch over you.
I also managed to get through Mortal Kombat XL. I don't think you're supposed to call it 10, but maybe. And, well, despite having a considerably easier story mode, I felt like I didn't gel with the gameplay as well. Hardcore fighting game fans seem to be all about speed, but I think they bumped it up a bit too much for me compared to the previous game. I had a really hard time inputting any combos before getting smacked around. Nonetheless, I look forward to streaming Mortal Kombat 11 in 2025, and Mortal Kombat 1 whenever they release a complete physical version with all the DLCs like they've done for the previous games. Most of the other Ninja games finished throughout the year were of the 8 and 16-bit varieties, as well as modern retro games. Cyber Shadow made quite a splash when it was released a few years ago, and is one of the more popular indie games from recent years to remain bafflingly without a physical copy. I initially played a bit of this on an MLiG stream in 2022, and I started over this year to dual stream it with Drumble for some backloggery streams. It plays so great, has some great sub-weapons and impressive bosses, and yet, after I played it both for MLiG and backloggery, much of it quickly flitted out of my memory. It's a great game that's right up my alley, and I had a great time with it, so I just cannot explain why it seems to be so forgettable for me. Coury played The Messenger back when the physical copies released, and if you missed that, by the way, a fresh run is available through Video Games Plus at the time we're making this video. But I only finally just got around to playing it this year, yet another series of backloggery dual streams. It's honestly pretty hard to talk about the game without revealing a wee bit of a spoiler, so maybe jump ahead a minute or so if you don't want to hear it, but honestly, it might be just the thing that makes you want to play the game to begin with. About a third into the game maybe, it switches from 8-bit to 16-bit style graphics, and from then on, you spend much of the game jumping between the two styles. I didn't particularly expect to jibe with the game's jokey meta humor at first, but it walks the fine line in just the right way to actually really work for me. The gameplay and writing both lean into tropes just as much as they subvert them. Much of the dialogue is optional, but this is a rare example of an action game where I feel the writing is good enough to be worth breaking up the flow for it. The Metroid Prime-esque artifact hunt that consumes much of the latter portion of the game was not particularly appreciated, although you should ask the store owner for hints much sooner than I did. You're really kind of supposed to, I think. That aside, this is a slick game that had me laughing and ultimately feeling warm and fuzzy about video games as a creative medium. The long-awaited next game from Tingo Project finally released this past year, Shadow of the Ninja Reborn, which was played in co-op on the backloggery stream. It was pretty interesting to see Tingo Project tackle an update to an NES game, since the gulf in visuals is much wider this time. The real-time inventory management can be a bit fiddly, and there are a few other control quirks, namely a bit of a heavy feel to your movement. I'd heard about that lag ahead of time, so I went into it with my head in the right place, and it didn't bother me too much since I was expecting it. I'd say that I enjoyed Tingo's work on Wild Guns, Ninja Warriors, and Pocky and Rocky more than Shadow of the Ninja, but it was still a great time. I have to confess, I've never really liked the arcade or Sega Genesis Strider game all that much. So I've always been a bit curious about the Strider NES game just because it's so different, even though I know it's not that popular. Whoo boy though, this is one of the most technically unsound video games I have ever played. Every time you jump and the screen scrolls vertically, it feels like it's all about to come crashing down into a pile of popsicle sticks and hot glue. That said, I mostly had a good time in spite of it, since it was fun to figure out where to go next to complete all of the objectives. It wasn't that difficult, aside from the stressful final level and nonsensical final boss. If you'd like to look under the hood at Strider NES's totally broken physics and see if they could be fixed, check out this excellent video from our friend Chris of the YouTube channel Displaced Gamers.
Let's first disable ejection logic using a single game Genie code and see what happens when we run to the right. Am I going to run through the wall? No, I actually stopped in a way that you would expect.
In 2024, I added to my setup a new RGB mod for the first time in quite a while. A Game Gear, which is also equipped with a controller mod and a new LED backlight. Fenris Wolf Retro, who helped me get it all installed, joined me for a christening stream while I sampled a bunch of carts. But then over on the backloggery, the ninja action continued. The Game Gear Shinobi games are excellent and stand on their own as quite distinct from the arcade and console games. I'd beaten the first GG Shinobi a while back, so this year I tackled Shinobi 2: The Silent Fury. The initial levels, which you can choose Mega Man style, each has a ninja to rescue, an orb to collect, and an optional health upgrade to find, and they're really fun to explore. Well, aside from the factory, maybe. The different colored ninjas all have their own weapon, special ability, and unique magic, and you can switch to whoever you like at any time after you've found them. The last level, however, is extremely long and becomes a bit of a maze. Time lost all meaning as I made multiple attempts through this labyrinth, but luckily most of the bosses are fun to fight and it's overall a good but unforgiving level, and a great game.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
A less impressive Game Gear ninja game is Ninja Gaiden. This looks a lot different from the NES games, or even the Game Boy game. It's also super easy for the most part and extremely short. I couldn't quite beat the final boss at first, but getting back to the last level took only like 15 minutes. It's certainly not an indispensable game, but it's not bad. It's just that it doesn't do much to justify its existence. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: Radical Rescue for the Game Boy ended up being a much more involved experience than anticipated. What I knew going in was that it's a Metroidvania of sorts where you start as Michelangelo and unlock the other turtles as you find and rescue them. This aspect was good. Nothing extraordinary for the most part, but solid enough. What I didn't expect was for the game to culminate in one of the most brutal boss rushes of all time. Luckily, the game has passwords, but this took me a couple of months of off and on attempts to finally finish. And yes, I know save states exist, but I'm just too darn stubborn about playing by the original rules. It did leave me with a lot of appreciation for how well designed the bosses in this game are for the most part, though. They have very clear tells before each attack, but executing on that knowledge consistently can be quite the challenge.
Oh, no problem.
Alright, so hear me out here. Joe and Mac's alternative title is Caveman Ninja. So surely Joe and Mac 2 Lost in the Tropics counts for the Year of the Ninja, right? Well, it did make for a very amusing stream. Wow. Dude.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Saying, you don't get melon.
But ultimately, the game's design is just not great for co-op. Being stunned by friendly attacks with limited room to maneuver makes it so that 2 players on screen at a time just isn't very useful, aside from the fact that you can revive immediately after dying as long as both players still have lives. When I visited John Linneman in Germany earlier this year, we went to what they call a Retrobörse in Heidelberg, which is essentially like a smaller gaming convention with a focus on vendors. I had my eye out for Master System games because not only did Europe get many great Sega-developed Master System games that North America didn't, but European Master System carts play perfectly on 60Hz systems. But it's also a great place to find some deals because I got Alex Kidd in Shinobi World for only 45 euros, which is nearly a third of how much it would cost in the US. This was the Alex Kidd game that I'd most wanted to play, but I'd written off ever getting it until I just happened upon it at the Retrode, and I knew I was buying it as soon as I saw that price. The game itself is a pretty light and fun little romp with more flair than you might see in most Master System games, from shiny Mario 3 style bricks, wall jumps, and the ability to spin on poles and fly off like a fireball. It's pretty easy and breezy aside from the first form of the final boss, but it's definitely worth playing, for the European price at least. Other Ninja games finished through the Backloggery streams in 2024 include the Ninja Turtles arcade games, the brutal yet awesome and quite unique Ninja 5-0, and Tanuki Justice.
You ever play a game when there was just entirely too much going on?
Occasionally.
Apparently John Lenneman's out here making all of our dreams come true because he surprised me with my own copy of Alex Kidd in Shinobi World that he found a couple of months later after I lamented Try's luck with getting one of the Master System games that was out of reach for me. So truthfully, this is probably the best Alex Kidd game, even though I love Miracle World and Enchanted Castle because of nostalgia. However, I'm not sure if Shinobi World would have been as good without the inspiration of the original Shinobi. It's very much a parody of that game, but I guess in retrospect, it stands very well on its own because unlike the other games, or most of the other games in the Alex Kidd series, this one doesn't have any ultra vindictive elements to the gameplay. As such, you can blow through this game pretty easily once you understand how to rack up an insane amount of lives. After I finished Alex Kidd in Shinobi World, I took on Alex Kidd in High Tech World, a game that I hadn't played in literal decades. The nostalgia goggles are way too powerful with this game, and I have all of these fond memories of finding my way through this when I borrowed it from a friend as a kid. But, you know, so many years later, what in the heck is even going on here? When I say earlier Alex Kidd games were vindictive, this is the epitome of that. The trial and error of the castle hunt portion, where a single wrong answer can put you back at the title screen, can't be saved by the 80s Sega trivia. And the action stages in the back half are pretty crummy too, with one-hit kills in a giant hitbox. This one honestly should have stayed in my memories. Gunstar Heroes, am I right? That's all I really need to say about it, and you get what I'm saying. There's almost nothing about it that needs expounding, except don't be like me and wait like a decade before giving it a good playthrough again. It's better than you remember. It's better than you remembered remembering the last time you played it. Especially that first level music. Go on, pause this video now and go play some Gunstar Heroes because you deserve it and it deserves you. Double Dragon Advance, the 2003 remake of the arcade original, doesn't get enough love. The degree to which this game respects its origins while updating the gameplay just enough to make it preferable to the somewhat janky original is surprising for the era that it came out. The fact that this has been tied to the Game Boy Advance for the last 20-some years meant that it sort of gets lost in the library and commands a decently high price for those who want to seek it out. Thankfully, this version was included in the Double Dragon collection on the Nintendo Switch. I'm getting to the point with my video game library where I have most of what I want physically, and the only real outliers are the more expensive titles. I've been opening myself up to paying more for games each time that I visit a video game convention. So at the Midwest Gaming Classic convention this year, I decided that it was time to splurge on Konami's The Adventures of Batman and Robin for the Super NES. Up to this point, I'd only played the first level, and I really liked what I saw. It's a different game than the run and gun style of the Genesis rendition, but in many ways it is more appealing to me. There's lots of gadgets to use, such as the always welcome grappling hook, and some super nice looking character sprites. But holy moly is this game tough. It has passwords, but it does that thing where the passwords remember how many lives and continues you have left. Hardly convenient, and it really took the wind out of my sails for wanting to finish it after streaming it. It's good, but not the price that I paid for it good. So I'm going to propose a new rule right now. Every time I decide that I want to pay a stupid price for a game, I need to have played at least a large portion of said game via flashcart, Mister, or something like that before I go through with it. I don't care how good of a price I'm getting, because it's simply too expensive to justify spending that money when I'm not even totally sure if I'm going to love it. This Batman and Robin cart will forever remind me of this going forward. I had a similar run-in with Shatterhand on the NES, but in that case, I neither paid an insane amount of money, thanks to MLiG patron Rears to Blood giving me a good deal on a decent-looking cart, nor do I think that it's truly annoyingly hard. I was likely just having an off night with the game when I played it on one of our weekly live streams. It seems to be challenging, but not egregiously so compared to other games that I finished on streams in the past. So I'm going to earmark this one and give it another go in 2025. Also earmarked is the supremely cool Landstalker for the Sega Genesis. Viewers of last year's Games We Played video will recall that this was on my list of 10 games that I pledged to finish this year. Despite getting a nice start during one of our live streams, I didn't return to it the following days, which then became weeks and months and, well, here we are. I guess the game was really about to open up too. This game is fantastic, and I had absolutely no issues with the quote-unquote frustrating controls. So I'm simply going to prioritize this as a must-play immediately in the new year, because there's simply no reason for me to not have finished it. I may have to start over, but I can't say I hardly mind that idea. I took a family vacation out to Big Sky Country with my family this summer. Out to Denver, the Badlands, Devil's Tower, Yellowstone, and the Grand Tetons. It was incredible. Indescribable, really. I've never seen those sorts of sights in my life, and I'd like to say that it changed me at my core. I could talk about that for several more hours, but one of the coolest parts about that trip was how it began. Since I was in Denver, home of the famous GameSack YouTube show, I was invited to co-host an entire episode based around reviewing 3 games that we'd never played before. Joe suggested, forced me to play Superman on the Genesis, Dungeon Explorer on the Sega CD, and Tale of the Sun on the PlayStation 1. Although you can hear my more fully featured reviews on that channel, here's a quick rundown of those 3 for posterity on this channel. Superman from Sunsoft marked their return to the DC universe after the success of the Batman games. Unfortunately, they don't fare nearly as well here, not because it doesn't look or sound great. The soundtrack in particular has some of the all-time best pieces of music on the Genesis. The problem is getting there. Because it's so ridiculously hard, you'll likely have given up before you get to the good stuff. The ease in which Superman dies from cheap shots from boring henchmen sucks a large chunk of fun out of actually playing as Superman. Dungeon Explorer for the Sega CD shares a name with the TurboGrafx-16 game, but that's about it. This version was developed by Westone, and is more reminiscent of Gauntlet, which just might be more appealing to some. In general, it's a highly streamlined alternative that I'm hesitant to call better than the original, but it felt more approachable to me. The only real drawback is that it's pretty much a grind fest, but I think there's comfort to be found in that style of game. Tale of the Sun may very well be the most fascinating game that I played all year. What the heck even is this nonsense? This PS1 title from Art Inc. and published by Sony dumps you into its prehistoric world with barely any direction of what you're even supposed to do. I started out hating it, but that hate subsided over time, and I really came to appreciate just how weird it is. The PlayStation 1 remains a deep well of oddities just waiting to be discovered. Thanks again for hosting my family at your house, Joe, and thanks again for letting me guest host an entire episode with you. It was super fun to do a more focused and extensive reviews of games again. Maybe I should get more into doing it over here? Okay. So, anyways, Konami and M2's Castlevania win streak continued with Castlevania Dominus Collection, which featured the trilogy of Nintendo DS games and the arcade spin-off, or whatever you want to call it, Haunted Castle. I haven't played any of the games in this collection before, so I decided to start with Dawn of Sorrow, the direct sequel to Aria of Sorrow on the Game Boy Advance, which I played and loved when it was originally released. I don't know if it was because I hadn't played any Metroidvania since Aria of Sorrow, and even though I think the genre is overcrowded today, I actually found this to be quite enjoyable and refreshing because it's just so darn straightforward. I was initially nervous that this collection would run less than optimally on certain consoles, but because M2 apparently only partially emulated the games while recompiling other portions, it looks, runs, and plays great. Not having to deal with the touchscreen controls was a boon, although I did think it was pretty neat that you could use touchscreen controls with the Switch version. I also played through M2's bonus Haunted Castle remake, Haunted Castle Revisited. This is vastly preferable to the Tough as Nails, or should I say, Tough as Steaks original. The new version sands down the numerous rough edges to that original game to the point where you can blow through it in a couple hours. If you liked M2's Castlevania Rebirth on WiiWare, then you'll notice how similar this immediately feels and plays. I personally enjoyed the chunkier look of this more than Rebirth though. I replayed Zone of the Enders: The Second Runner for the first time since the day that it originally came out on the PlayStation 2. And dang, I forgot just how good this game is. It truly pushed the PS2 hardware. After fumbling the PS3 and 360 HD collection versions, this one is the one to get. Things get chaotic, but it doesn't miss a step, or frame, or whatever. At least to my eye. I had totally forgotten how nonsensical the story is here, but I'd like to think that I understood it. Beyond the Bounds is still an all-time great when it comes to vocal themes in video games.
So many enemies! We're all going to die! I need your help! Hurry!
James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else?
To round out this unexpected trio of Konami games, I have Silent Hill 2, the original Silent Hill 2 on the PlayStation 2. This was on my pledge list for the year, so as everyone played the remake in October of this year, I decided to play this one for the first time. Let's get the obvious out of the way immediately. This is an impressively gorgeous game for 2001. The oppressive fog, film grain, and 60 FPS cutscenes hold up extremely well to scrutiny. You can feel the filth of the dilapidated Silent Hill streets and interiors resonating from the screen. It gives me a similar vibe to when I watched the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre on VHS for the first time. While I'm happy that I played it, there were certain aspects that I struggled with that brought down portions of the experience. The camera. It's the camera. The way it repositions itself to face you whenever you come out of a door clearly trying to obscure your surroundings in the dark and make you feel lost, becomes less effective over time and leads to annoyance when you have to check your map constantly unless you want to go in the wrong direction. I almost considered playing the Silent Hill 2 remake immediately after playing the original, because it would have encouraged some interesting comparisons. As it turns out though, I'm just going to have to play that one in 2025. Of course, it wouldn't be an MLiG Games We Played wrap-off if the Yakuza series wasn't represented in some capacity. I played Yakuza 4 this year. As per my yearly pledge list, I'd like to talk about that a bit more. But first, I'd like to quickly talk about playing the original PlayStation 2 Yakuza over the course of several early drink coffee and play a game live streams I did on the severely underutilized MLiG Twitch channel. I purchased a double pack of sealed original PS2 Yakuza games from eBay when I got into the series a couple of years back. I was curious to see the differences between them and the Kiwami versions, but I also wanted to see how playable these were in comparison. Turns out, this first game feels incredibly modern, even today. The most obvious difference here is that it uses a fixed camera angle versus being truly third person. Of course, there's the English voice acting, which sure is something. I haven't played any of these games with their English dubs before, but since I was forced to here, yeah, it's not great.
You like that? What?
That's enough.
I'm doing this because he disrespected you.
The story plays out almost exactly the same, but there's a lot less fluff in the original. Even just getting the main story going at the start takes a whole lot less time. I might even say it's better, but I'm assuming that the fleshing out that Kiwami does is to play up character aspects revealed in Zero. Either way, this is a good time, and is hardly as arcane as you might expect from the first entry of a long-running series.
You wanna die?
But then, Yakuza 4. I'm not going to say that I didn't like Yakuza 3, because I did, but it was easily the weakest of what I had played up to that point. For those keeping track, I'm talking about Like a Dragon, Kiwami 1, Kiwami 2, and 3. If 4 had been another downer, my resolve for the series might falter. But Yakuza 4 is amazing. I'd venture to say that at this point in time, it's my favorite in the series. Of course, I still have a lot more left to go. Based on the games that I've played so far, 4 seems like the point where they truly figured out what they wanted the series to be and hit their stride. They had an idea with 3, but maybe the jump to HD stopped them from really going crazy. The story takes a bit to get going, especially since we don't even get to play as Kiryu until several hours into the game, but the way each arc intertwines is remarkable. Here we have another layer to the city and 4 playable characters, each of which gives insight to the different factions around Kamurocho, as well as their playstyles, fighting moves, and so on. So yeah, the jump from 3 to 4 is insane, and I expect the jump from 4 to 5 to be similar, considering that's the point where the games really started getting ultra long. I can't wait to find out.
It may have been the year of the ninja, but we certainly got up to a lot more than that on the Backloggery streams, every Monday night from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern on Twitch for your information. On the very first day of 2024, for the Backloggery stream, we decided to do something that we'd been talking about for years that's well outside my gaming comfort zone. Play a whole bunch of Atari 2600 cartridges on original hardware. And indeed, we tried out more than 40 cartridges. I apologize that this is very RF quality, but my modded system wasn't reading carts as reliably as I needed it to during the stream, so I had to fall back on this. But I suppose RF does give it that ultra authentic flavor. I wouldn't say that any one particular game totally rocked my world, but perhaps the biggest takeaway of the evening was that most games were, honestly, totally fine. Much more playable than I, whose first gaming memories are of the NES, have generally given Atari games credit for being. Cosmic Ark, Jungle Hunt, Haunted House, and Snoopy and the Red Baron were some of my favorites from the evening, with a few of the more involved ones like Montezuma's Revenge and Adventure also being games that I feel I should put more time into. I wouldn't say that this experience is going to turn me into an Atari fanatic, but between that and the time I spent in 2023 at an arcade event in Winston-Salem that showcases a huge collection of Golden Age era arcade machines, my appreciation for the pre-NES era of video games has certainly risen a good bit as of late. While it wasn't a game on my own backlog, and while I didn't finish it, I can't neglect to mention the insanity that was Super Bunny Man Co-op, which longtime Backloggery supporter Snake Eyes directed us to play. Is it good? Not really. Is it supposed to be good? Certainly not in the conventional sense. But does that matter if I'm absolutely positive that I laughed more over the course of these 4.5 hours of streaming Super Bunny Man than I have ever laughed over the course of 4.5 hours at any other point in my life?
I'm gonna make a bridge.
Oh!
Never mind, I hurt my butt.
I think you can do it. I think you can do it.
We need more distance.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh God,
no! Super Bunny Man is a platformer of questionable physics where you cannot move through any means other than turning your angle and propelling yourself by springing out your legs. Sheer absurdity ensues. Whoa! Figured out Bunny Man fly and you're just like dunking my dead body down in there.
Yeah, you sure did figure it out, didn't you?
We even figured out how to exploit the physics by having one player grab the other who jumps against them, essentially allowing a form of flight that was difficult to capitalize on, but definitely helped us get past some tricky levels. There's absolutely no way that I'd have had so much fun with this game if I weren't streaming it, and if I weren't playing in co-op, but boy, oh boy, will I never forget it.
Yeah. Yep. Oh no! You're okay. You and me are getting out of here together.
A more conventional spot of side-scrolling co-op was had with Contra Operation Galuga. Now, I did edit some trailers for this one, so I may be a bit biased, but I do think that this game turned out better than many people give it credit for. I think a lot of first impressions may have been harmed by showing it off on Switch first, where the frame rate isn't so hot. Even on PS5, it's not got the prettiest graphics, and I do wish it looked more similar to WayForward's earlier work on Contra 4. But on the whole, it plays quite well, and I like the variation between the characters, where everyone aside from Bill and Lance has one weapon that takes on a different form for them, similar to Contra Hardcore weapons. The optional badges also add some interesting risk-reward considerations, such as the one that lets you sacrifice a weapon for some health recovery. I'd also suggest that people listen to the music outside the game. It was criticized a bit, but I know from the work that I did that it's got some great remixes. It's just that the music is drowned out a bit in the gameplay mix, so it doesn't hit as hard as it could.
Damn! Party time!
So earlier this year, I learned of a pair of beautifully designed shooters exclusive to Japan, the first of which is Bokan to Ipatsu Doranbo. These are based on the classic Time Bokan anime series, so it's got a cool double retro whammy with the 70s style character designs and FMVs alongside 90s pixel art. I know very little about this series, but in these games, you play as the bad guys, who I understand are the most famous characters from the show, and are 100% responsible for inspiring every idiot antagonist trio in anime ever since, like Team Rocket. The sheer variety in the vehicles you can choose is super cool, and they all play fairly differently, with different upgrades. But also, whatever vehicle you're in breaks down after every stage and has to be repaired, so there's a cool strategic element to deciding which vehicle is the best fit for each level, saving it for when you need it, and learning to be good with multiple machines. There's also a risk-reward aspect to prepping bombs, which are unlimited, but will destroy your vehicle if you get hit while carrying it. I found myself to be a bit more risk-averse when it came to bombs compared to Drumble. I really love how most of the game takes place on the ground, and the way the vehicles rotate as they turn and how the screen scrolls slightly side to side just feels really good. There's a tactile feel to the movement that's different from your typical flight-based shooter. I'm certainly not the biggest vertical shooter enthusiast, but something about these Bocon games is extremely appealing to me. I can't wait to play all the way through the second game, which is called Bocon Desio. This is top-notch import gaming. The PC Engine version of Jackie Chan, known as Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu Outside Japan, is broadly similar, but also fairly different from the NES version, which we even did a backlog comparison stream of. I'd beaten the NES version before, but the PC Engine version was one of my 2024 pledge games. The NES version has shorter levels and is overall much less daunting, but both versions are excellent and well worth playing. It took me quite a good several attempts from the beginning to get through, because you don't start with very many continues. You have to earn them through hidden mini-games. It's a very satisfying game to learn though, and is one of my favorites on the PC Engine. So something that turned out to be an unexpectedly wonderful experience was playing one version of the Satellaview Zelda games, a stream request from my childhood friend and backloggery supporter Enchilada. I'd never fully wrapped my head around what exactly made these or a lot of other Satellaview games worth playing, but this is not just a 16-bit remake or remix of Zelda 1 with the Satellaview avatars instead of Link. What's so cool about this is that you're kind of working together with your wizened old bearded buddy, Mr. It's Dangerous to Go Alone, in your quest for the Triforce pieces and to defeat Ganon. He telepathically communicates with you at set points in time on the game clock to reveal information he's uncovered about locations of dungeons and items. Sometimes he might cast spells that are to your benefit, such as every enemy dropping big rupees for a while, or warn you of timed events like the overworld being taken over by the toughest monsters. There are even scenarios like the fairy from the spring going missing, and she won't return unless you can find her before it's too late. Originally, of course, this was communicated through voiced Japanese dialogue that was synced up to the game timer because you were playing over the satellite service during the scheduled broadcast hour. There are many ways to experience it today, including English reenactments via MSU1 enhancements, but the way we decided to play was with a patch that cuts to a wall of English text in place of the dialogue. Although, as you might imagine, the English has to be pretty condensed compared to Japanese. So the old man comes across as if he's in the throes of insanity.
And what's more, I strongly feel the power of the stars that guide you.
It might seem like an odd gameplay hook, and certainly the tight timing can be stressful, as you have several goals to achieve during the gameplay hour for each of the 4 weeks broadcasts so that you'll be on track to finish on the final week. It reminded me a bit of the randomized events that might occur in an open world game, except those are usually dumb, and here it felt fresh and interesting. And also, being synced to a friend having the same experience sort of recreated the vibe of the live broadcast, and a bunch of people struggling together toward the same goals. Even in this somewhat hacked format decades after the fact, this was a special experience that I'm glad I had. And I have to imagine that for many Japanese players in 1995 and 1996, it remains one of their fondest gaming memories to this day. And for me, while it may be a bit of a surprising choice, I'm going to call this my new to me game of the year for 2024. A few other games I managed to beat in 2024 thanks to both Backloggery streams and MLiG streams include Hunt Down, which is a wild time in co-op, the remaster of Fatal Frame 4, The Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, which is the fourth game in the series originally for Wii, the Night Dive remaster of Quake 2, which we played in co-op, Iron Meat, which was a surprisingly excellent Contra-like, Capcom's Eco Fighters and Captain Commando arcade games, Sonic the Hedgehog for Master System, which was one of my pickups in Europe, and it's honestly more my speed than 16-bit Sonic's, and 007 Nightfire, which our friend from the Still Loading podcast and James Bond aficionado Josh Covell suggested I play when he helped co-host the MLiG stream one week.
Okay, before I get into some of my favorites of the year, I'm going to do a little best of the rest on the games that I neglected to put anywhere else in this video. Splurging on that expensive as heck Annapurna collection for the Switch opened me up to a whole bunch of games that I wanted to try. The cart is so jam-packed that it fills the entire Switch home screen UI. Donut County is the first one that I tried. How to best explain this? I don't know, it's like a reverse Katamari Damacy, where instead of gathering everything up into a ball, you're moving a hole around and making things fall into it. This is a weird one, and it's all the better for it. The Annapurna compilation was also a good excuse to replay Sayonara Wild Hearts. Now, this absolutely has staying power because I think about it often still. I also started up The Artful Escape, which I heard enjoyers of Sayonara say that it carried the same spirit. I don't know if it was just the Switch version in particular, but this is one of the few times where I was actively turned off by the visual style, resolution, and frame rate. I wonder if playing this on more powerful hardware would push me to play further into it. Rollerdrome is an ultra-cool mashup of Jet Set Radio and dystopian futuristic competitive sports films like Rollerball. Here, you rollerblade around wide-open areas, pull off different tricks and grinds while blasting enemies. It's super stylish and cool. Paradise Killer was on my pledge list for 2024. It oozes style both visually and orally, but I couldn't get it to click with me on the two occasions that I tried to sit down with it. It seems to have a fascinating story and setting, so I'll definitely be giving this another chance. Penny's big breakaway from Evening Star, who previously did Sonic Mania, seems like a shoo-in for one of my favorites of the year. But, I don't know, it just didn't grab me. The length of the first world and levels felt artificially drawn out to the point where it kind of got on my nerves. There's a ton of good here, I just wish that I liked it more. Beat-em-ups have been having their own little renaissance lately. Digital Eclipse offered up the hotly anticipated Power Rangers Rita's Rewind in early December. Amazing sprite work abound, but the actual brawler action isn't that deep. Where it really shines, in my opinion, is on the on-rails superscalar shooter levels. I played Fortnite for the first time this year because my kid was practically begging me to play it for months. Although it's not quite for me, I can see the appeal and why it's popular. To some extent, it's the game that we probably dreamed of when we were kids, whether we knew it or not. Digital Eclipse released some DLC for one of my favorites of last year, Atari 50 The Celebration. Perhaps it's self-serving, but I just wanted to mention this here because I had the opportunity to edit the bonus interviews included in these add-on packs. But I also wanted to mention the second and third entries in their Gold Master series, Lamasoft The Jeff Minter Story, and Tetris Forever. These collections, which are essentially interactive documentaries, are among the best things in video games right now, and I am so happy that they exist. I can't wait to see what future entries hold. I can't imagine them being bigger than Tetris, but You never know. My copy of Ray's Arcade Chronology finally arrived after about 2 years of waiting from Strictly Limited Games. I talked about this collection in one of our multi-game compilation videos earlier this year, but forgot to mention that it also included the single-stage prototype R Gear. This is apparently only included in the physical version and is quite cool. The physics-based platformer, Super Sammy Roll, struck me as N64-esque, but I'm hardly a professional on the console. This was okay. I made my wife and kids play through the Coury with me using the couch co-op feature on my birthday this year. Part of me hoped that they'd gain some interest in narrative-focused video games, but alas, this didn't seem to move the needle at all. I loved Until Dawn, and this was a step down story-wise, but it's such a good-looking and sounding game. I dragged myself from the dregs of Doom poserism last year, so what better way to inch closer to enlightenment than taking on Doom 2? Right off the bat, I found this to be better than Episode 4 and Doom 1. It's more complicated, sure, but it feels more well thought out and fair. I didn't progress much past Episode 1 though, so I'll have to return to this one and finish it. Okay, with those out of the way, let's ease our way into some of the other bigger games. Any year a new Ease game releases, it's automatically near or at the top of my must playlist for that year. Ease 10 Nordics came out in late October, and I ordered the special edition from NIS. There's a lot that I was looking forward to about this game, specifically that there'd only be 2 playable characters. Not that I didn't appreciate the large parties in all the games since 7, but I'd gotten a bit sick of it. The first few hours are full of, here's a new game mechanic, use it once, and then listen to the characters talk about it for 20 minutes moments. But once the guardrails are taken down, it quickly blows past Ease 9. There's a lot of new gameplay mechanics here, some underutilized and half-baked, such as the Mana Ride hoverboard, but at its core, it's still the same intense Ease action we've come to know and love and expect from Falcom. Traveling the world by boat is clumsy at first, but as you pick up additional crew and enhancements, you become nearly unstoppable. Narratively, this game takes place between Ease 2 and 4, so we're once again back to teenage Adol, but it's Karja that steals the show. Outside of Dogi, I don't think that Adol has ever had such a strong co-star, and you really care about her by the time that you reach the end. I'd like to see Falcom stick with this 2-person party, or at least find a way to have Adol on his own again in future entries. I could also stand to see them go back to a less dialogue-heavy, breezier story, but I doubt that's going to happen. After the vacation to Yellowstone and the like this summer, I felt an itch to start Red Dead Redemption 2 as soon as I got back, as a way to see how it handles a lot of the sites that I had seen on that trip. I wish I could say that it clicked into place right away, but that would be a lie. In fact, I bounced off it pretty quick thanks to its glacial pace and relatively complicated controls. I returned to it several months later with a more open mind, and that's when it got its claws in me, nice and deep. This is a fascinating game, and the love for it totally makes sense. I can't think of another game that I just felt like I could exist in it. The only one that even comes close is Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. The big difference between those games and Red Dead 2 is that you can miss things permanently in Red Dead 2. Because of this, you get the vibe that things in this world are occurring around you at all times, whether you're present to witness it or not. I know that's not totally true, but it makes you feel like it is.
Gotta say, that was some fine shooting.
Gracias, cowboy.
I won't finish Red Dead 2 in 2024, but that's alright. I'm sitting around 50% of the way through the story, which has recently taken an unexpected turn. I can state now, without hesitation, that this is an impressive accomplishment, and I can't wait to see what the rest of it has in store for me. The older I get, the more I find myself enjoying the act of going into a game totally blind. Tunic, which I played around February of this year, is a perfect example of why I like doing this. Think of it like playing the original Zelda for the first time, except in Japanese or in some language that you don't know how to read or speak. You're faced with little to no direction from the outset, but as you pick up pieces of the game manual during your journey, Ideas, mechanics, and secrets slowly come to light. Sometimes clues are hidden in plain sight on the page of the manual, but you only realize it's a clue once you see something similar to it in the game. Tunic is pretty tough though. It's almost Souls-like in its combat. Lots of dodging, parrying, and dying. For those who would rather solve the puzzles without so much friction from the combat, will enjoy the easy mode. You can toggle this back and forth at your leisure if you find a particular enemy or boss too hard to handle. I recommend Tunic to anyone who loves Zelda, but I also encourage you to give yourself to the process of what the game wants you to experience. Don't look up anything online, just try to figure it out on your own, and once you do, man, it is so fulfilling. A few years ago, when I finally got around to playing Nier Automata, I was so close to calling it the best game that I played during that particular year. I fell in love with the story, the world, the music, and the style. When Stellar Blade was revealed as Project Eve in 2021, it had my interests, but gave off a "but we have Nier at home" vibe. From the get-go, Stellar Blade was said to be ripping off Nier Automata, right down to the music. I don't think of it so much as ripping it off, but more like being inspired by the vibes that it creates. I barely cared what happened in the story. Obviously, it's not going to touch Nier's, but the desolate wasteland of human civilization with a melancholy veil of forlorn vocal tracks playing in the background is an atmosphere that I like, and it's really effective on me. If this was the 50th game to try this, I could see it getting old, but for now, I'll take about as much of it as I can get. What I wasn't expecting was how focused and concise the combat is. I thought it would be something more chaotic, like your typical Platinum Games battle system, but this is much more precise. Parrying is the preferred defense technique in combat, and once you get the hang of it, it's so satisfying, especially when you pull it off multiple times in a row. Having dumped in over 80 hours to get the Platinum Trophy, it's clear to me that Stellar Blade is evocative of a PS2 era game with a shiny modern veneer. That is one of the many reasons that I would call it my game of the year. After 2020's occasionally janky yet extremely solid remake of Trials of Mana, aka Secret of Mana 2, Try and I were enthusiastic about its particular brand of mid-budget revival, especially in contrast to the mega budget of Final Fantasy VII Remake. 4 years later, we got the exact same 1-2 punch with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Visions of Mana. Unfortunately, I don't think that Visions hit the collective conscious the same way as Trials did, and likely killed the franchise for the foreseeable future. I wonder if the tepid response to it was because, well, let's face it, this is a big old fat 6 or 7 out of 10 game, and the appreciation for mid-range scoring games isn't what it used to be. For me though, this hit at exactly the right time for me, and I totally appreciated it for what it is. Some beautiful music, occasionally striking graphics, a relatively boring story that takes some unexpected turns, but it does feel like a classic hack and slash Mana game, and that is a positive in my book. But yeah, it's far from perfect. The action might come off as basic and sluggish compared to something like, say, Nier or even Stellar Blade, but it is expanded compared to what was in the Trials remake, and besides, just having air dashing is usually enough to sate me these days. Don't get me started on the egregious amount of annoying exclamations when you pick up collectibles in the overworld. I basically turned off voices just so I didn't have to hear "Grizzly" over and over again while I picked up the syrup bubbles all over the overworld. All is forgiven though when you see how beautiful the mana tree looks in this game. It looks just like the Secret of Mana box art. It's crazy. Okay, so while it's not my personal game of the year, it's hard to deny that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was easily the game that I was most looking forward to playing in 2024. I cleared out my schedule and dove into it on day one. I was so curious how things might play out in the greater open world of Final Fantasy VII versus the centralized specifics of Midgar and Remake. What the team came up with is truly amazing and fully realized, even if it does tend to slip into the rote checkmarking of a typical open world game.
Confirmed. Data received. Life springs such as this can be discovered in every region.
This is one gorgeous game. And once again, the music is so good. But where the game faltered for me was the inane mini-gamifying of almost every activity. Come on, I don't need to learn a new minigame just to pick mushrooms. I know that I didn't have to do this stuff, but the fact is, I wanted to spend as much time with these characters as possible. A stark contrast to, say, Final Fantasy XVI, where I just ended up button mashing through side conversations. I was hanging on every conversation to the point where I really cared about these characters so much more than the original game. That, combined with the knowledge of a certain major event that this game would include, except, thanks to the ending of Remake, things could now be different. I found myself scared to death about how things might play out to the point where I dragged things out as long as I could without having to face what was to come.
So a little sightseeing couldn't hurt, could it?
Would she, or wouldn't she?
Let's see.
In the 8 months from when this game came out, I've experienced the opposite of what happened with me with Remake. I originally hated the ending of that one, but came to appreciate what it meant, and my views softened over time. I thought about it a lot. With Rebirth, though, I was happy with the ending initially, but I've come to like it less and less over time. Still, I'll be there day one for whatever comes next.
Pushing it.
All set. Me! Come on! Gonna pull back. I'll show you what I can do. Okay.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was easily my most anticipated release of 2024. I was in Germany when it released, which delayed me starting it by about a week, but being abroad also made it fairly easy to avoid the internet chatter in the meantime. And when I got home, it was actually awesome to have something like that to sink my teeth into while I reacclimated to the time zone. Despite FF7 Remake opening the door to radical change, I think FF7 Rebirth is actually, on balance, much closer to the source material than Remake. The point-to-point plotting, it's broadly pretty much exactly the same, but of course with embellished details and, yes, extra mini-games, most of which were fun enough, I think. But I feel like there were fewer completely new and unnecessary scenarios added to the main quest, like Remake's trip up to the plate between the first two bombing runs, or the sewer nonsense before climbing the wall. Those really added nothing purposeful, I felt, so sticking with the original plotting I think worked in Rebirth's favor for me. But I am still curious to see where all of the weird new things in the background are going. The biggest difference, in my opinion, is that the location of a certain very important place is on an entirely different point on the globe compared to the original game, although upon revisiting this section of the original after finishing Rebirth, I did come to realize that this resolves a potential plot hole in terms of Aeris's movements that I'd never considered. But of course, while the main plot is broadly the same, Square Enix knew they had to prove that they had the guts to do the whole world map thing, so this is also pretty much world map the game. Which, in modern game terms, means it's an open world with lots and lots and lots of optional quests and thingies to do. And I did almost all of it. I do have my problems with open world structures, but the way the game was divided up really worked for me and made me feel like doing all the stuff in each region wasn't so overwhelming. My main criticism would be that many of the new core gameplay elements, the Magnata books thing, the partner skills, stuff like that, were extremely uninteresting to me. They didn't really get in the way too much though, and all of the good stuff from Remake is still here, so it's quite fun to play. At any rate, it's a great, but flawed and quirky game, which, hey, if it wasn't, it wouldn't be Final Fantasy VII. I was thoroughly entertained, I thought the ending was very well done, and I just hope that AAA gaming hangs on long enough for us to get to part 3. This was my Game of the Year for 2024.
And there it was, the first step on our new journey. You coming?
Yeah.
Of course we are.
It somehow took me all the way from January to October to get back to my pledge games, but I came back swinging by marking 2 off the list. Coury wasn't as big of a fan of Doom 2016 as he had hoped when he finished it a few years back, but it hit all the right notes for me. This is just Doom through and through. Arcadey action, rewarding exploration, and secrets to find, it's all there, and it just feels so right to control. I don't know about you, but I can't even imagine playing this game without using the option for placing your weapon in the middle of the screen. That is so key to it feeling so right. My only critique would be that the levels on Mars are often a bit visually uninspiring, but things get better in the second half. And now I'm even more excited to play Doom Eternal and Doom the Dark Ages. I always say I like my Dreamcast games weird, and boy oh boy does Kenji Eno's D2 fit the bill. Sometimes I'll play a game that is so interesting that I honestly couldn't tell you whether it was good or bad, and in some cases maybe that doesn't even matter. Now, something I didn't know until just prior to playing is that D2 is unrelated to D. They simply share the same quote-unquote virtual actress, Laura, being no more connected than D and D2 are to Enemy Zero, which also stars Laura. Epilepsy warnings should perhaps be assumed for any retro game content, but before I show any combat, I do in this case especially feel that I should very much say epilepsy warning, because D2 has perhaps the flashiest rapid muzzle flashes I have ever seen in a game. So the first surprise for me upon starting D2 was, well, it's kind of an RPG? You wander snowy terrain, encounter monsters on a random basis, and go into a stationary first-person view where you can only pivot left and right, aim, and fire away with unlimited ammo rapid-fire weapons or limited ammo weapons like grenades and a shotgun. After battle, there's a little pop-up showing experience points gained, which of course leads to leveling up. The unlimited ammo weapons are generally very sufficient given the plentiful healing items, which can be endlessly hunted for in most locations with an infinitely reusable but very shaky rifle. Figuring out what this game even is and how to adventure through it really hooked me in the beginning. It absolutely is janky as all get out, but it's actually really not at all difficult to play. In fact, opening up your items menu during combat pauses all action, and healing items can be used freely until you're at max HP with no real-time wait or animation required. This makes the gameplay fairly inconsequential, but you can save anywhere, so it's on you to remember to do so, just in case. I did die once and lost more progress than I would have liked. Interior areas are examined in first person like the original D, but with real-time graphics. Uniquely animated cutscenes play out for pretty much every mundane item Laura picks up, just as if it were an FMV game, although these can be skipped if you like. As much as I am a defender of silent protagonists, there's a lot more dialogue here compared to the original D. And so conversations are very one-sided, long-winded, and awkward.
The prophecy is fulfilled, and you are possibly... No, I ought not ask.
A lack of subtitles can be pretty frustrating too. Kenji Eno clearly had a lot to say here, though. And, you know, whether it lands or not, I applaud him for just going for it and getting it all out.
It's tough trying to go to sleep by yourself. With no good memories to fall back on, it's like the night clings to you.
I found myself a bit fascinated by the archive screen, which automatically adds characters, places, and general terms as they come up in the game's story. These entries hint at the game's themes, but also provide brief dictionary-style descriptions, making the whole thing feel like a Dreamcast-era version of going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole. D2 defies definition, but if I had to compare it to other games I've played, I'd say it's maybe like a mix of Resident Evil Gaiden, Severed, and Death Stranding. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone other than people who like to play unusual games from notable game creators just for the sake of historical perspective or whatever. But if that's you, well, it only asks for about 10 or 11 hours of your time. I wouldn't ever play through it again, but it certainly made an impression.
I tried to impress my own dreams and ambitions. Please forgive me.
Since I heard it was short, I wanted to squeeze Little Nightmares into my spooky season gaming. If you've ever railed against yellow paint syndrome in video games, then Little Nightmares stands for everything you're looking for. Except, maybe you'll learn why some signposting can improve some games. Because at first, I was delighted by how surprising a lot of the interactions are. It feels like you can grab onto and play with environmental objects in very grounded, realistic ways that you would expect to be able to do in real life, but not necessarily in a video game. But soon enough, I found that the heavy controls, fiddly physicsy interactions, and lack of clarity and consistency in terms of what objects can be manipulated and which ones can't led to a lot of frustration. Death can come very suddenly, and I rarely felt like it was really my fault. I love the vibe and aesthetics of Little Nightmares, and all of my issues are things that could very easily be improved upon in a sequel, so I'm still planning to give the next game a shot. But every time I felt like I was really enjoying this one, it just kept doing something else to make me mad. For my trip to Germany, I decided that my big game for the flights and any other downtime I might have would be, finally, Great Ace Attorney 2. Of course, it's pretty long, and there was that whole matter of FF7 consuming over 100 hours of my time, so it took me some months after the trip to actually finish it. And I won't linger on it here because it's hard to show much of a game like this without risking spoilers, but it's awesome to finally have closure on that story. Now the only Ace Attorney game that I've got left to play is Ace Attorney Investigations 2, which I can't believe finally got an official English release this year. Another travel game that I was playing around the same time was the highly unexpected remake of Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I've never liked the aesthetics of the Mario vs. DK games, with the annoying mini Mario toys and whatnot, especially not next to the unbelievably great Donkey Kong 94. But aside from some frustrations in the levels where the mini Marios have to follow you, it's just a great playing game, and perfect for bite-sized play sessions. Something I was excited to do when visiting John was to try out both the PSVR 2 and Quest 3 VR headsets. I was hoping to walk away wanting a PSVR 2. I mean, this was earlier in the year when Sony was still trying to at least pretend to care about it. But I'll tell ya, even though PSVR 2 has that HDR OLED, the Quest 3 lenses are so much clearer and make such a huge difference. I hated to admit it, but it was the one I felt compelled to get. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut the VR section short here because I just don't have time to do more with it, but I do want to at least give a quick shout out to Walkabout Mini Golf, which you can play on Quest, Steam VR, and PSVR 2. It is an absolute can't miss VR experience and is one of my favorite games I played this year, period. The premise is simple, mini golf in VR, but it executes it so perfectly. Putting feels exactly like you imagine it should, and it's just a joy to chill out in the varied courses of this low polygon world. Trust me, it looks way cooler and runs way smoother inside the headset than my recordings may make it seem. I also really loved Humanity, which you can also play outside of VR on consoles and PC, although VR makes the crowds look much more impressive. If you miss old school puzzle games like Lemmings, I think you'll have a great time with Humanity. Alright, so let's tally up how many of the pledge games I actually got to over the course of 2024. I beat Heavenly Sword, D2, Doom 2016, and Jackie Chan. I'm pretty close to the end of Blink's the Time Sweeper, but it's actually really hard after the first 3 worlds, so I'll have to finish that in 2025. In addition to Blink's, that leaves Willow, Dark Savior, Space Station Silicon Valley, Jak 2, and Sekiro unfinished. And that's to say nothing of having not even touched my leftover 2023 pledges of Lunar 2, Trails of Cold Steel, Ys 8, Hyper Light Drifter, and Viva Pinata. I really thought I was just going to move straight on to Lunar 2, and I almost started Hyper Light Drifter several times, but just didn't. So, I guess y'all are just going to have to continue to be very cross with me. But we've realized now that perhaps we should have only been doing 5 per year to begin with. So this time, only 5 new pledges. But we've also got a new twist suggested by our old buddy Blade Blur. We're going to choose 4 of our own pledges, but then I choose the 5th for Coury and he'll choose the 5th for me. So with that, in 2025, I pledge to beat the original Tomb Raider, Wild Arms 4, The Eternal Cylinder, and Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair. And for Coury, I challenge you to beat the Resident Evil 4 remake. Some of you might be confused by the inclusion of Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, but even though it did appear in the games we played in 2019, I actually hadn't quite finished it yet. It was one of my absolute favorite games released that year though, so I felt that I had to include it, but I never quite made it through the Impossible Lair itself. So I'm going to start all the way over from the beginning, this time in 4K, and finally right the wrongs of 2019. And if I don't, I want you to be very cross with me.
Maybe 5 pledge games is a bit of a cop-out, but it seems less insurmountable to me considering the amount of games that I didn't finish in the previous years. To recap, my 2023 leftovers were as follows: Undertale, The Witcher 3, Brave Fencer Musashi, and The Last Story. And for 2024, I had Mega Man Legends, Lufia 2, Psychonauts, The Outer Wilds, and Crystalis. It's pretty pathetic, right? So let's just say that any and all of those are on the table for the next year, and I'm going to drop the following into the queue for 2025. Lost Odyssey, The Last Guardian, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, Ragna Senti, aka Crusader of Senti. And of course, Try has demanded that I play Resident Evil 4 Remake, so let's just chuck that on the top. For him, I'm going to make him return to the Yakuza series and insist that he plays Yakuza Kiwami. Alright, so that will about do it. Another year in the books. So, as always, we wish you the best in 2025, and we will see you next year.